Hello, and welcome to this video lecture on Chapter 16, Closing the Project. So in today's video lecture, we're going to do the following. One is an introduction to the closing phase, and then we're going to look at the typical things that happen during the closing phase, transitioning to the operations of the organization, reporting the results of the project, storing the project documents and files, and finally documenting the lessons learned. So just to round out our project lifecycle that has been shown in each week is that we have the initiating, planning, executing, and closing phase across the top. And as you can see, or as is by the name of this video lecture, we're in the closing phase. So the end of the project, which is closing the project. So here we are at the end of the project. Okay, so introduction. Once all project deliverables have been created, the project moves into the final phase of the project lifecycle, the closing phase. One thing, though, that is unfortunate is that this phase often receives insufficient attention as the focus shifts to new projects. The closing phase is not a particularly long phase, but it's one that seems to suffer from inattention. Teams are looking to get on to new, and there's a new project that's starting up that's new and exciting. So some of the things that are done in closing, which is mostly documentation and reflection, are less necessarily exciting for project teams to do. So it often um, falls prey to lack of attention, and that's unfortunate because the closing phase is very important, which we'll see why. It should be avoided to ensure that the project ends effectively. There's been many projects that have done a great job for the first three phases, and then at the end, it's just not tied up properly. The loose ends are not tied up, and it doesn't end well as for the project. So let's look at the things that need to be done. One is transitioning to the operations of the organization. And if you remember way back to chapter 1 of the textbook, we talked about the difference between projects and operations. And if you remember, the operations is the part of the organization that performs the ongoing work of the organization, of whatever this company or organization is producing. Operations does that over and over and over and over again to produce the output of whatever this company does. Projects, as we again saw in chapter 1, often or almost always create something that is then blended into the operations of the organization. And so projects end, they need to give over their output to the operations. And so it's this output that will remain in the organization beyond the end of the project that we have to think about. As well, a great deal of knowledge is gained about the project scope during the project, and it is important that this information is not lost once the project ends. There's information about the product, about how to support it, about its maybe peculiar characteristics, things that customers will call in and need to know about, and so on. So that it's really important that knowledge is also transferred to the operations area. So the plan should be developed to ensure the effective transition to the operations area. This may involve involvement of the project teams in the operations for a period of time. It may involve some training, some mentoring, some creation of documentation, and so on to be given over to the operations area. It varies from the project to project, but thinking should be done in terms of how to transition the output of the project to the operations area. At this point, please refer to your textbook, the chapter 16, and please read the section entitled Transitioning to the Operations of the Organization. So once you've done that, then please pause this video first, and then once you've done that, come on back here and we'll continue on in terms of the rest of the closing phase. Okay, so now that you're back, you'll see that what happened during the DecoCam product launch project in terms of Sophie's activities during that transition. So let's move on now to reporting the results of the project. So again, think back to the very start of the project, the initiating phase, where we talked about a business case was created, which talked about the costs and benefits. And then a project charter was created. That was the approved budget, the approved due date, as well as the objectives, the goals and objectives of the project. And then those were further developed in terms of planning. So there's been an investment in this project. And the organization wants to understand, did we get the benefits? Was the return realized from that investment? So that's what we want to look at. So again, recall that during the initiating phase, the project was approved based on anticipated costs and benefits. During the closing phase, the results of the project are reviewed. So we now can see what was done to determine the actual costs and whether the benefits were achieved. Now, it's normally very straightforward, relatively straightforward, to measure the costs of the project. Sometimes it's a little more difficult to understand the benefits because they may not accrue until, weeks, months, even years after the project is complete. So the measurement of benefits is challenging, but it can still be attempted. There are certain things that we can measure. These results are documented in a document called the Final Project Report. So again, please refer to the case study update in the chapter 16 on page, looks like 187, and read about how that process was performed. Here is the final project report that was created by Sophie and her team, and you can start to see it reviews some of the initial information that was in the project charter, the name of the project, the sponsor, the project managers, just reminding those who are reading this. The readers of this report would be the senior management of DecoCam, the CEO, presidents, vice presidents, and so on. And then it's doing kind of a before and after picture here in terms of the project goals. The goal of the project was to successfully launch the version 4 by the target date within the project budget, and to support the company's goal of a 5%. And then it shows the actual results. So the target date, it indicates it met the target dates, and so it's referring you below. So it said it met the target date. The final project cost was within the updated project budget. See below for details. So if you remember, during the course of the project, there were certain approved changes that were made that increased the budget as we went from the original charter. So that's why change control or change management is project change management is very important. And then market share, the actual results is indicated as all objectives were completed. So we achieved our objectives. And so therefore we supported the company's goal of a 5% increase in the market share. The assessment of the market share will become known over the next 6 months. So here's a recognition that once this project is done, we don't know yet, but we did what we needed to in order to support that goal. In terms of the objectives, you see what the project charter said. We needed to update the product info, promote the new product through existing communication channels, create a promotional video, and create trade show materials. And you can see we did all that. All the project objectives were achieved. Going on to the next page, the project charter wanted the product launched by May 8th and the project complete by May 13th. What our actual results were is we were done a day early, so that's good, and we closed right on target on May 13th. The budget, the original charter budget was $60,000. But the final costs were $61,250. So you might say, oof, we're over by $1,250. But the original project charter budget was increased to $62,600 during the project due to the following approved changes. So if you remember, during our project execution, there were change requests put in place and they were approved, which increased our budget to 62,600. So we were actually under budget by 1,350. That's why it's really important to track changes and to update your project plans, because this is the difference between over budget and under budget at this point. So I'm glad, I'm sure Sophie is glad that she did the due diligence on the changes. Okay, the next step in the process: storing the project documents and files. And believe me, this is the task that will get people wanting to start initiating other projects, because this is kind of archiving, which a lot of times project people are not real excited to do. But it needs to be done. Many projects, many documents are created during the project, and the retention of these documents is useful for future teams, project teams. It's often useful to look back and see, hey, what did we do in the previous project? What WBS did we use? What was the scope statement? What was the budget for that previous project? And how did they do, how did they organize their budget? There's all kinds of things that can be learned from previous projects. So during the closing phase, the project manager should ensure all documents are filed and files are stored according to, and again, the project documentation guidelines. Remember, in the communication planning, we developed the project documentation guidelines. Well, we should follow that and make sure that we are true to it. And again, please pause the video and return back to the textbook and the case study, storing the project documents and files. Okay, now on to the last step in our closing phase, is documenting the lessons learned. While every project is unique, lessons learned during a project may be useful for future projects. Even though every project's unique, the process of managing projects is similar. So we learn things. We learn things about status meetings, about motivating people, about how to get requirements more effectively, maybe how to schedule effectively, what days are the best to have status meetings. There's hundreds of things, big and small, that we learn. If we don't think about it, they're going to fade in our memory. Some of them might stick, but many of them may fade. So it's really, really super important that we record this, is get it onto paper and into electronic files, and then we have something that we can use to remember. We're writing really the history of our project. Many project team members and stakeholders should be involved in this collection of lessons learned. Get many people involved, because there's different points of view. Some things might be seen as a success in one person's eyes, might be seen as a challenge in another. And those are things that you want to get different points of view. It's recommended that lessons learned meetings are put together, that you get groups of people together and talk about things that went well, things that didn't go well, and what could we do differently next time. But there's a danger there. It can become a blame game, sort of whose problem was it and who's caused it. So care should be taken to ensure that this is a review of successes and opportunities for process improvement, and not a discussion of performance issues or an opportunity to assign blame. So it's okay to talk about challenges, but if we start saying, well, that was caused by that person over there, then things will just start to fall apart. So this needs to be a collaborative learning process, not a blame process to find the person who could have done better. That's something that should be done in a whole different way outside of this process. Again, please return to the case study in the textbook, where we'll see the process that Sophie used to document the lessons learned. And then here's the result of her analysis. So in the case study, you would have seen that a lessons learned, a meeting was put together where this information was gathered. And the lessons learned really consists of three main parts. And this is the both the process in the meeting and also the format of the final report is to first of all document, hey, what was the good news? What went well during the project? And it's important to celebrate our things that went well, because we want to do those again next time. The project kickoff meeting was very effective. Scope statement was good. Duration estimates were accurate. The on-the-job training went well, and the level of risk management went well. So those are all good things. Now, next section is the opposite. Well, what did not go well? And again, let's not be shy about this. Let's really examine this. Team members were not quite sure when their tasks were scheduled, so there were some scheduling issues. The cost estimates from materials were optimistic, and perhaps not accurate enough. Team members are not always available when originally planned. There were times during the project there wasn't enough communication, so there were some communication hiccups. A number of problems regarding the project's quality came up, so some quality things. So those are some things that we should work on. And then the third section is really a two-parter. Well, okay, given that, what should we do differently next time? How can we improve upon things? And that's really what we're trying to get to. We're not trying to get at, complaining about what was done before. It's what are we going to do differently next time? So you can see some of the things that were there. Ensure team members know what their tasks are for each week. Now that's what we want to do. How are we going to do this? And you can see that. Investigate ways to produce individual weekly task reports. So work on reporting. What we should do differently next time is improve cost estimating. How? Spend additional time validating the material resource estimates through online checks. So a different method of cost estimating, and so on. You can see the other three, what we should do differently, and then how we will do this. And this is a continual process. We're never going to get perfect on our projects, but if every project that is performed, we improve a little bit, we're going to, over time, get better, and an organization will get better. The reason why these are written down is that other project managers and other teams can read this and gain from the experience of this product launch project. So the next project that's starting tomorrow, perhaps with an entirely different team, can read this and say, hey, I saw what happened last time, and we're going to use some of those new ideas in our project. And that's the whole purpose of the lessons learned process. And finally, the last case study update for the DecoCam project. The epilogue shows kind of the final results of the project and how it all sort of comes together at the end. These are the references for the slides that were used. And again, thanks for watching.